into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America.
Yeah.
Pop little rips, and then Alex started the show and then got up and left. Ballsy move.
Left us to his classic New York window with the fucking brick wall behind him. It's just no joke.
He's in a broom closet. That's a broom behind him. I don't know where he is these days. All right, hello.
Is that a Dustin?
Yeah,
it looks like a Dyson. Is that a Dyson?
Is it a Dyson?
Don't zoom me.
I'm just thinking you should work.
Don't you dox my vacuum brand on air?
Enhance. You have a British. Who sells those? Is it an actual British guy who comes to your apartments? Like,
yeah, it's the Dyson vacuum guy.
You need a Hoover.
He sells it door to door.
Speaking of sucking.
Whoa!
Nancy Reagan is in the news. Sorry, I'm trying to do it.
From downtown.
You know what? You know who else sucked properly? Actually, more than properly.
What? You just gonna steal my bit that I was stealing from you?
Well, he's adding. We're a cooperative.
It's a collaborative effort. That's what it is.
If you've been on Twitter for the last 24 hours, then you've probably heard the news. Nancy Reagan is the official blowjob queen of history.
Well, history is debatable. Maybe American history.
Yeah. Well,
America's 39th throat goat.
Her and Superhead, I think, are tied.
Oh shit!
They would have to have an
you
off.
Took me back.
An off.
Yeah.
Use the first deck.
Is she dead? Is that why everyone is talking about it? Because they're like, now that she's dead.
Classically, Abby, who
my
also,
girl, by the way,
judging from,
shut up,
shouldn't comment on her adequacy with the oral arts. I don't know one way or the other about classical Abby, but she was saying that she's saying, "Hey, look at Madonna, who had a nip out in a photograph of her at age 63."
But she looked great though, because she
looked great. I don't know how much of it was touched up, but I'm going to assume none.
I mean,
her whole body is made of science by now, if that's what you mean. But
her entire body was yassified. There's nothing wrong with this.
Oh, yeah.
Call it what it is. I mean,
these are the lives of the wealthy people.
She's living her best life.
Years old and looks not like a human, really.
She was actually I believe she had a photograph book made in the 80s when she was dating Vanilla Ice, where there's a little bunch of sex acts in the book. Madonna and isn't that right? I don't know. Anyway,
and Vanilla Ice, and the post is it's 63-year-old Madonna looking hot, and then 64-year-old Nancy Reagan with her grandchildren, and she's not looking so hot, folks. She's looking like a traditional 64-year-old Nancy Reagan.
Yeah.
And she's saying, classically, Abby is saying, don't you want to be like Nancy Reagan?
Yeah. What do you want to look? I think I saw that one. What do you want to look like in your future, right? Like, which one do you choose, right?
Yeah.
Choose your own adventure.
Statement about the traditional path and then the decadent lib path of becoming Madonna and having a fake ass and stuff. And kind of murky what she was really trying to say or who she was trying to stick it to, but this entirely got derailed by a lot of people chiming in to let her know that this is a false premise to begin with, because Nancy Reagan, even though she might be looking prim and proper at age 64, cannot escape her past. She cannot escape her past.
Yeah, she's a fucking demon, yeah. She's a ghoul.
Which is that she was the throat goat of Hollywood.
Right.
During a
dick sucker demon, okay.
Shit.
There's a whole kind of
you say during the McCarthy era?
Well, maybe before that.
But it probably during, so maybe she got out of it.
Because she was sucking dick.
Yeah.
Have you now, or have you ever nodded in my mouth?
It's interesting. I've been reading this book Landslide about the Reagan administration, and it's interesting with first ladies how much ambition they often have, because there's an old saying about Hillary Clinton that she and Bill were traveling in '92, and they go through Illinois and they see one of Hillary's old boyfriends, and Bill is like, "Ever think if you had married that guy instead of me?" And she says, "Well, if I'd married that guy, he'd be president right now." And
like behind every man is a stronger woman or some shit like that.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
Him.
Yes, and Nancy Reagan,
the expression,
sucking his cock from the back. Yeah.
And Nancy Reagan, Nay Davis, which I don't know if I've ever heard that term out loud. Nay, that's like
I didn't know how you pronounce it like that. Like that's her maiden name.
Right.
Okay.
Nay Davis. She apparently the similar expression about her and Ronald. If she had married him before his first wife, then he wouldn't have ever gone into politics, because he would have been like the top of the line actor in Hollywood, winning 1,000 awards instead of just a himbo GE spokesperson.
Yeah.
So she was, she had willpower behind, everything she did. She had an astrologist, and that's basically, it's crazy because that is the actual reason Reagan was reelected, is because she consulted an astrologist. It happened to be good decisions, but that she was basically in charge of all of his political decisions. He didn't know what the fuck was going on.
Well, the stars were in charge.
Well, they were into soy culture, like, because I'm assuming all these right wing jobs, they think like astrology. I mean, I don't even know if they know anything about it, but I think normally you would think that's some like soy left shit. You know what I'm saying? Like weird, kooky, like belief system shit. But so you're saying that like it was actually the right that like brought that shit in and popularized it to the point that Reagan became president.
Well, Reagan's were old Hollywood weirdos.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They're from true. Like the Light and Magic show era where fucking L. Ron Hubbard got his start with the weird cult parties and shit. I don't think they were. I think that was like kind of a secret though, that she was into astrology. It was like because it was somewhat of a embarrassment when it came out that she consulted one.
There's actually this famous story that the Reagans, Ronald and Nancy Reagan, were walking down the street one day, and they saw one of Ronald Reagan's ex-girlfriends, and Nancy turned to him and said, "What do you think your life would be like if you had married her?" And he was like, "Well, she would be the throat goat of
throat goat of history, man.
The real story." We should fucking intro the show. This got derailed
extensively. The train went to a different station.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jake Flores. That's Alex Patak.
Hello.
That's Anders Lee.
Anders Lee here. Can I just get one more thing out about the Reagans?
I don't think I can stop you.
After we introduce Aaron.
All right, fine.
Christ, you can't cut off.
Hold like 5 seconds.
Yes. And from Trillbillies, Aaron Thorpe. Welcome back to the show, man.
Yo, what's up, y'all? Thanks for having me back on.
Of course. And we are going to eventually talk about Derrida, but we are still
deep into the throat goat.
We're deep inside the esophagus of the introduction of the show.
Well, this is here. I'll find a way to connect it.
I already did this like 10 minutes ago.
Fine.
Go ahead, please.
I just want to say, last picture of Ronald Reagan, because he died in 2004, but the last picture of him that I could find was from 1994. So there's like 10 years there where we don't know what the fuck was happening to him. You remember when he died? I guess it was 2003. You didn't see any photos of him that were recent. It was like they held him up in some fucking coop somewhere. He became a ghost or a gremlin or one of these, something. I'm sure Derrida would have something very extraordinary to say about the elder Ronald Reagan.
You're implying they had him buried alive in a crypt just to prepare him for his time in the afterlife.
He became a specter of American politics, of modern American politics.
And
Yeah.
truly,
Was that the
because
segue you were going in?
yes.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I mean, if I was
Okay.
going to actually guess what they did with him, I would say they took an empty stable where the horse had passed away recently and just put him in the corner there, and he just kind of checked out until his heart stopped working.
I mean, he had no brain like while he was president.
While he was the president, and that was way earlier.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't just put him down. Honestly,
I mean, just make him like, let him on like a farm on a pasture, and just make him like feel the grass beneath his toes and his feet.
Touch grass, Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, literally, man.
Log off.
but this does relate to the Hauntology. He effectively is still the president, if you really think about it.
Yes.
Oh,
Sure.
okay.
One could say that with the kind of rise of neoliberalism and its entrenchment in the political economy, that we've been it's been a long 40, 50 years, one could say,
I'm going to get this out of the way up top. I did not do the reading. So what I'm going to do is ground the episode and let you know if you're really connecting with the average voter.
You'll be our barometer for the normies. Is that what you're saying?
Okay. Gavel, gavel, gavel. I'm banging my gavel. The grounding is a good idea. Let's discuss from the base here what we're talking about today, because this is pretty heady postmodern bullshit that gets real slippery, and we're gonna veer off into crazy town real quick.
It's like Nancy Reagan's mouth in here.
Hauntology, okay? The topic of today, something I wanted to talk about that Aaron wrote a little bit about recently, and that I've kind of had on the brain, and that heavily plays into like culture. Me and Aaron have been talking a little bit about culture, pop culture and shit like that. And so the hauntology, essentially, let's just define it. Let's do a hack essay. Hauntology is defined as, so Derrida, one of the postmodernists, came up with this term. It's a mashup of haunting and ontology. Ontology is like a philosophical term about the existence of a thing, and haunting is haunting, or
it's like a portmanteau.
Like just for all the philosophy nerds who are triggered out there because they're like, Derrida is not a postmodernist. Yes, he is. We know it when we see it. We're going to call him one, and you can't stop us.
What is he? What do people say? He's like a post-structuralist or something?
Some bullshit. So a deconstructivist.
Deconstructivist or whatever. Yeah, nobody cares. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Well, here's the conversation. How do you pronounce his name?
Derrida. No, I have no idea.
Where's the little accent mark?
Derrida.
If you're from the South, Derrida.
How you pronounce it in the South? Yeah.
Yeah, if you're Southern intellectual. Derrida.
And thus begins the Cajun philosophical treatise.
I think people say Derrida, but I don't give a shit. So he sort of came up with this term hauntology that describes. He was talking about like the kind of malaise post the fall of the Soviet Union, and how there is still a specter of communism. Ironically, even though it doesn't exist anymore, the right is still very much triggered by communism. I mean, you see it today all the time. Fucking Lauren Boebert and all these people are like acting as if communism is coming to kick down their door at any minute. And that, it's very advantageous to them to act like there's this threat because they get to trigger all of their Dale Gribble sort of voters and stuff into thinking it's happening, and that therefore I need to go storm the Capitol or vote for Trump or whatever the fuck, right? So he's talking about how that's ironic because it's like something that's dead like still exists very much in the minds of people, but also there's kind of two modes he described, which is one that is like when communism was a specter in real time, a ghost can be in the future, something that's like scaring you, into thinking, oh, if we don't do this or that, history can veer off in this one direction. Exactly. That's future ghost mode. Past ghost mode, though, the one that's kind of most used when talking about this is like he talks kind of about like this longing for like nostalgia, like lost futures is the term.
A lost future, a mourning for like a lost future. And Jake, I just wanted to say too that like you just made me think about it. Like usually, like when you like watch, like I'm thinking of Poltergeist as like a ghost movie, and there are a ton of them like that. But like there's always the anticipation, the exorcism of trying to like, you know, get this ghost to stop haunting you, you know? So it is very much like all these ghost stories really are based in kind of like this sense of like the future and time moving forward, because it's, I guess, the anticipation or the anxiety, right, of still being continued to be haunted. You know what I mean? So like as Fisher says, and we'll get to that, but it's like that the neoliberalism or late capitalism is haunted by the disappearance of communism, not the apparition of it, you know?
Right.
And I think the Democratic Party is like one of the, you mentioned the right, but the Democratic Party with Bernie Sanders especially is like a great example, because they're haunted from all the, I guess, the what didn't happen after the New Deal coalition fell apart and the civil rights movement and so on and so forth, you know?
And it's funny, you know what they love to say, that liberals love to say this, that and it's even with people like Evo Morales or whoever, they're like, oh, these are old ideas. We need new ideas. These are old 70s. People say this about Corbyn all the time. He sounds like he's from the 70s. Yeah. God forbid. You know, that's a way of dismissing, is alluding to the past.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, the 70s. I mean, specifically the 70s, because, like, I mean, we'll get to this, but that's kind of like where arguably, like, a lot of history, like, kind of ends, and like, you kind of do need to reach back to the 70s if you want to do anything, because after the 70s, we made the neoliberal turn, and then, you know, politics became gobbledygook or whatever. But I'm jumping a little ahead of myself. But so just so you know, if you've seen this term around, if you follow like Deleuze freaks and stuff like that on Twitter, and you see jokes about hauntology, it's a very slippery thing. It's been defined by a bunch of people in a bunch of different ways. So, you know, essentially we're talking about this sort of like, the big term that's used is disjointed, this like disjointed way of haunting through time, whether it be a specter in the future or this like lost opportunity in the past. Lost futures is a big concept in it. Like, and I think that's very similar to something we talk about on the show a lot, known as counterfactuals, you know, the whole what if machine. What if fucking so-and-so had won World War II or whatever. These are things that, you know, politically kind of hang in the air and influence our culture, just wondering, you know, if one pivotal fucking thing that led us to where we are here had gone a different way.
Yeah, a lot of people like talking about those. I'd say around 1 in 4 people on any given podcast can't stop talking about them.
That's true. Would you name that person?
Okay, what if it was 3 out of 4 though?
But it's not, though, is it? It is 1 out of 4.
Okay, but what if it was 4?
It kind of cuts back to the whole core of the situation that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, well, we only have, you know, really it's 1 in 3 plus a guest sometimes.
Plus a guest,
but we're haunted by another one who.
It's true. The Spectre.
Rogov. The meta specter.
The meta specter.
One thing, so I did not get through most of this, but I did read the opening, and it starts with a very compelling point, which is how living in the 21st century, for everyone our age, you know, millennials, people who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, culture now feels like a reiteration of the culture that was developing 50 years ago with like different lens filters on it. Like just kind of the same shit that we're pretending is different. I don't know. That really resonated with me.
The book that Alex just referred to is kind of what we're talking about today, which is Mark Fisher's Ghosts of My Life, which is like 100 and something page,
like 170. It's really collection of essays. It's really short. I should have
like Ghosts of My Life, folks.
It's Mark Fisher book, put out on Zero Books in like 2014, and it's about this concept. So he's kind of reworking Derrida's hauntology idea, and I didn't finish it either. I mean, it's kind of it's kind of a long meandering thing, even though it is rather short, because he talks about the concept in it, and I jumped around the book a little bit because it goes in and out of like talking the theory a little bit. It kind of reminded me of Chuck Klosterman, the way like it's a series of essays where he's diving into these pop culture things and then working out philosophy in them.
Yeah.
But I think he's probably smarter than Chuck Klosterman.
Definitely.
Because Klosterman's famous for being a thing that you read in college. It's just like Saved by the Bell was a weird show. And coffee table book, right? But this is like materialist Marxist Klosterman. Arguably. Yes, that's what I was thinking when I wrote it.
So anyway, he's a redhead.
Sure. That book, though, that's the one where he starts off talking about all this, and the kind of first thing that he works through is talking about how the moment that we're living in is really weird. The 21st century is odd if you think about music, especially because if you track music from like the second half of the 20th century, every 10 years, music changed in astronomical ways. Yeah. New things that entirely changed the world of music were introduced. If you were to play, some new wave from the 80s to somebody in like the 60s, their head would explode and they'd run around and fucking rip their clothes off and shit. And
what the fuck is this?
Yeah. But that's like a 20-year difference. Meanwhile, it's been however many years since the 80s, and basically like nothing changes anymore. He kind of talks about, and it's pretty true. Like, I mean, we're living in 2021. If you go all the way back to 20 years to 2001, and you play them, what our weirdest music sounds like right now, it's not really. It's all derivative. It's all rehashing of old culture and stuff like that.
The big example he uses, which I thought was so funny, he puts the Arctic Monkeys on blast. I don't know what these young men did to Mark Fisher, but like this is like his last book on ghosts on his way out of this life, and he's like, one more thing, fuck the Arctic Monkeys. That shit could be from 1983. Their hats. I'm out.
He did have one example. Besides the Arctic Monkeys, he had an example that I liked where he said he was walking. I forget the name of the song and I forget the original artist, but he's walking through a mall and he hears like what he thinks is a cover of like a cover of like an older song or whatever, like the original. Well, no, he thinks it's the original, I guess, right? But he realizes that it's an Amy Winehouse song that actually is a cover and that it's not the original song, I guess, that it's covering. You know what I mean? So he gets confused and thinks that this cover is the original. And he kind of talks about like, well, if you had taken that song back in time, like, 40 years and let people listen to it, it would sound a lot like the music that was around then. And I think like there's one thing about like, we'll get into it, but there's one thing about like kind of like going back to the past for inspiration. And there's another thing in not being able to create anything new. Right. And like Frederick Jameson talks about this a lot in one of his essays, that like it's pretty fucking sad that we can't innovate anything new. What does that say about, our political economy and so on and so forth? But we'll talk about that shit. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting.
I have to say, I don't know that I totally agree with Mark Fisher here. Granted, I was not around in the 80s when he's talking about. So when I hear the Arctic Monkeys, you look it up on the dance floor, I think, oh, that's from 2010. But I understand he saw the video and all those sort of ephemera made him think of the early 80s. I think, though, that arguably nostalgia, particularly in music, is itself kind of an innovation that you don't see necessarily in earlier decades. The fact, you think of sampling, right, in hip hop, because when that first started, people were like, well, you're just stealing part of another song. But no, they're building. That was a sample actually from a percussion track from. It's really, that's going to be the sound of the 2040s. I think that right there. But like when you sample, you're building on the fact that people already recognize that song and that sound, and you're playing with it, right? And I think that is kind of an innovation. I don't necessarily agree that. I tend to think time marches forward, right? And we keep thinking history's going to end, but things are changing for better or worse. Yeah. I get what he's saying in that there's so much more music and we have so much more capability now to do different things with different styles and utilize nostalgia in a way that wasn't done before. But I don't know that I totally buy that that we've stopped changing. You know,
yeah, I'm a little on the fence myself because like this dude's personal musical taste was so apparent in what he choosing. I mean, it was a little bit. I don't entirely dislike what he was talking about, but I was like, this guy definitely has what he likes, and he's describing what he likes as important and what he doesn't as not, and that's just very subjective,
right? But like, and that's my pet. Sorry to jump in, but that's kind of my pet peeve with theory, or not necessarily pet peeve, but just like kind of a frustration, I guess, with theory. It's like you're making the crux of your argument on a totally subjective thing that can never really be proven right or wrong, and then proceeding with all these other theoretical.
And he kind of mentions that too, because he does say that like what he's talking about sounds like an older person like wagging their finger at the younger generation. And something you said, Anders, because like I don't want to get too deep into it, but I want to kind of like clarify, like when he talks about nostalgia, he talks about specifically formal nostalgia, right? Which is, I guess, like kind of a term that he kind of infers from Frederick Jameson. He talks a lot about postmodernism, and like just to quote, formal nostalgia is quote, it's attachment to the techniques and formulas of the past, a consequence of a retreat from the modernist challenge of innovating cultural forms adequate to contemporary existence. So I think you actually brought up a good point. You made me think about it. Like hip hop has totally been about like borrowing off, like, you know, off of like riffs from vinyl records, right? Off of like, I guess jazz, I guess it was. I don't know if it was jazz, I guess R&B, but rhythm and blues as it actually was, you know, before we got like the crooning whack shit that's out now. But again, my opinion, right? But
that one sample from Full Metal Jacket where the woman says, "Me so horny."
Oh, really?
That's in a lot of songs.
That's Hauntology.
That is Hauntology. Like
she's haunting your track.
She's haunting you. I want to bring it to Nancy Reagan.
She's the Nancy Reagan of.
Yeah, you know you get Anders. You got the alley oop, bro. Got the alley oop.
Let this ghost be.
I mean, this is like we're joking, but I think you could make an argument in Fisher's own terms here that there's hauntology going on with what's happening with Nancy Reagan right now. She's dead, and this is from the past.
It was so good that it's haunting the American discourse.
Yeah.
Well, like much of Reagan's existence, right?
Yeah.
So, I did want to say, I guess, like before we get too far ahead, I guess we will talk about reboots and remakes and stuff. And I think that when we talk about formal nostalgia and this attachment to forms, right? These endless reboots and remakes, I guess, I mean, why the fuck should I care, right? I don't know. I guess it's entertainment for people. But I would like to think of like when I try to analyze culture, I would like to apply like, I guess, cultural Marxism. And I don't know, man, it does kind of worry me, I guess, as a consumer of this media, you know what I mean? That like, why are we like rebooting the same shit that like, you know, I grew up with, right? Or that came out right before I did, you know? And it's not even good. So I don't know. But again, that's my opinion. Yeah?
There's something real to the analysis here, which is catching on that like the way that the economy is run and we are forced to live our lives does trap us into certain ways of thinking, which produce cynical products and things that we've already seen before, because it's slop we've already had, so they know we'll eat it again.
Exactly.
But I think Anders is on to something, because like I was saying earlier, this is like a severely depressed man right before he kills himself, and that does come across in like Nothing Ever Changes or Gets Better, the book.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's right.
Yeah. And one of the points, and there's definitely truth to this about monoculture and big hits, and we don't have the same, you know, pervasive big hits that we used to back in the day. And that's true to some extent. We're certainly more culturally atomized, and that's not all bad necessarily, but there's still like WAP, wet ass pussy. Basically, you know, like seriously, throw a rock down the street and you'll hit somebody who's heard of wet ass pussy, or has at least heard the name.
Spectre haunts Ben Shapiro.
Wet ass pussy,
yeah.
I mean, like, and that's. I don't want to get too far ahead. I'll let you go, Jay, because I don't want to get too far ahead, because I think culture, like, specifically talking about like what does a new kind of culture look like is important to this, right? And maybe Andrews, as you were saying, like wet ass pussy, like as funny as that like maybe like some people, like maybe that kind of like reclaiming like decadence, which is what culture does all the time, right? Popular culture, at least, right? What was old or taboo or like, you know, subversive is now profitable. So that's definitely a big part of it, right?
Well, let's work our way through this. I mean, I think that there's like kind of points in and against, for and against Fisher all through this conversation, even within the stuff that he's talking about. Because like the argument he's kind of making with Hauntology in regards to music and the whole end of history thing here is that like our art is, you know, a product of the base, you know, our material conditions, and our material conditions changed at some point in the shift to neoliberalism, and it's reflected in the art. So instead of having this, you know, rich tapestry of history you see from the 50s to the 60s, the 70s, the 80s or whatever, you know, the 80s forward, you kind of have this thing where so like when he's talking about that Adele, or that is it Adele? I can't remember who. No, Amy Winehouse. When he's talking about how the production of that song is kind of doing something philosophically odd, where the producer has a style that is nostalgic. He lives in the 21st century, but he like purposely makes crackling sounds and stuff like that in his music to replicate, you know, the actual cracking sounds that were imperfections at the time in the 80s, but now are like fetishized or whatever. That's kind of like when you like there's something that kind of drives me crazy, but I also enjoy, which is in Brooklyn, a new bar opens up and it's like, it's new and it looks like it's been there for 100 years, and they get out of it because they know that that's what people want to drink in, is a place that looks like it's had the shit eaten out of it. So they keep bringing like weathered wood and stuff like that. And you're like, I'm very conflicted when I go into these places, because I'm like, this is fake. But also, I'd rather drink in here than like a new building, like looks like a fucking office or whatever. So, you know,
can I add to that, man? Because like, yo, like, I mean, like, there probably a lot of leftists don't have my diseased passion for sneakers, but I'm a sneakerhead, right? Like, you talked about this in your piece. It's really good. Right. I love sneakers, man, and like, there's been this trend, and I even got like a pair. There's been this trend where there's like a pre-yellowing or pre-aging of the midsoles of these sneakers, because over time, like if you have like a pair of Air Jordans, like original Air Jordans from 85, or even if you have a pair of like, you know, sneakers that have that certain, I guess, like kind of midsole, I don't know what material it is, but over time it starts to oxidate, right? It starts to yellow, right? Or oxidize, I guess. It starts to yellow. So like brands, like sneaker brands like Nike, especially with their Air Jordan line, like Virgil Abloh, rest in peace, just passed away. He came out actually right before he died. Nike came out with this Air Jordan 2 that like not only has pre-age yellowing, which he went in deep into Nike's vaults to like find this Air Jordan 2 low that was actually autographed by MJ, and he replicated the cracking of the midsole, because these midsoles crumble over time, like they don't last, you know. So the same way, like I said in my piece, you can buy a pair of jeans that already look worn. We see these things in fashion, you know. We see what I guess Mark Fisher called the refurbishing of the old, which, like you were saying, Jake, it's like, man, dude, like I could just buy these sneakers and beat them the fuck up until they look like this, but that'll take like 30 years. Like, don't I want to look cool? You know, there's something appealing about that older aesthetic that I don't know what it is, whether you walk into a bar or put on like a pair of, you know, brand new but vintage sneakers, you know?
Yeah, and if you want to go full into his galaxy brain here, I mean, the argument might be these sneakers immediately evoke like my connection to a moment in history where communism could have fucking happened in the 80s or whatever.
Oh yeah, dude, I think like that, man. Like with the, like, I love Air Jordan 1s. You know, I have a Soviet jersey. I'm like, yeah, dude. Like I'm rocking gear that, like, you know, when the Soviet Union was alive and rocking, you know, it's fucking diseased. But like that's the whole branding of nostalgia that these companies do, and they're very aware of, you know. Yeah,
well, we have like really powerful images and stuff that we collectively love, and like it, you know, I don't know, the brain's a fucking fascinating, powerful thing. Maybe it really is that we love shit that's like stuck really hard in the cultural zeitgeist, like fucking Star Wars or something like that, because it does have all this meaning and stuff, and it does like make us think about a time in our history where, you the world could have gone in a different direction or something like that. Maybe that's why the new Star Wars is kind of suck, is because they're disjointed in that way and they don't really make any sense. They're harkening back to the 70s, but not really. I don't know. But it's okay. So those are points for Fisher, I guess. A point against him, I guess, is like, I would say by his own definition, he talks about all this shit, and he talks about how like he's British also, by the way. So like everything he talks about is British in this, which is why I didn't get like half his fucking references. But I know a little bit about British music. And he talks about how in like the 90s, I guess, there was kind of this battle between Brit pop and like weird jungle drum and bass Massive Attack type shit that he's clearly really into. And he's kind of laments that like Brit pop won and Blur and Oasis kind of became what the UK was known for, and these things are really nothing new. They're just white guy fucking prancing around on stage doing rock and roll shit, nothing new entirely. But he talks about what he likes about drum and bass or jungle or whatever, which is that, I was going to say this when it happened. So earlier podcast, Alex Patak knocked something over. You heard this like clank, 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 clank sound or whatever. Apparently what's going on in the evolution of that type of music is, so when people first had the ability to isolate sound and like use Fruity Loops and Pro Tools and stuff like that, and they're on their own and at home and shit like that, they would take like something like that, and then like there's like one recording of like somebody doing something with a drum that became like the entire basis for a genre of that type of music. I can't remember exactly which one. Yes, Louise, she knows about it. She's from fucking Miami.
Oh, that's like in Star Wars too. One of the guys, the stormtroopers falling off the railing, that scream they use over and over again.
Yeah. The Wilhelm scream's what that's called. It's in like every movie.
Oh shit, that's in SpongeBob all the fucking time, man. Yeah. Somebody breaks a leg or some shit like that, man.
Yeah. But so like that happens, which is something that you couldn't do, 20 or 30 years beforehand because you didn't have the technology to isolate it. And then also like they would like slow down sounds and shit like that and stretch them out and do all these things and then synthesize them into a type of music that like the point of it was that it was new. And the reason that it was new is, and you could never have done it before, is that like these are sounds you like a human cannot make with an instrument, like all that like long, wow shit that I guess this type of music you're gonna talk someone's head off on fucking coke for hours at a time.
Noise music, very familiar with that in Atlanta. Yeah.
But like that is an example of this fucking the needle of musical history continuing to move forward in a way that he's saying didn't. So
can I push back a little bit against that? A little bit.
Of course.
All right, maybe not. So I guess what you're saying is that using technology like that didn't exist before, right? In this example, to isolate a sound and magnify it that you couldn't do before, right? That a human being couldn't make that noise. And I hate to keep going back to the text. This is why people should read it. But like, actually, I read the original text that Mark Fisher references, which is again Frederick Jameson, but he talks about like Star Wars, for example, right? And how Star Wars is a pastiche, I guess, not a parody, but sort of we don't even have to get all into that, but I guess it's a recreation of the sort of Pulp Fiction kind of like shows that like, I guess our parents or grandparents used to watch that used to come on Saturday mornings, right? Except the only difference now is, it's not really the plots. I mean, I guess it's not really this kind of heroic story, but it's more the technology that's been used, right? So I think that kind of goes back to that idea of refurbishing the old, where like it's very possible to use this technology to like create something new, whether it's music or movies. But for whatever reason, it feels like that's happening at a slower pace than it used to. And now this technology is being used in music, for example, like something like synthwave to recreate sounds from the past, or Star Wars to recreate that Pulp Fiction adventure space opera, that all of our parents loved. And, I guess those stories never go away, right? But I guess it's just the technology kind of like not being used to innovate, but to like renovate. Am I saying that right? I don't fucking know. But yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, there is I think there's a pretty standard complaint a lot of people have, but I was just for the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, I decided to watch Pearl Harbor 2001 and also Tora Tora Tora, which is a much better movie from 1970. And
that's a Hanukkah movie? Folks, it's a comedy show.
I'm sure some people watch it as a Hanukkah tradition in eight parts because
damn.
But it just looks so much better. The older movie, because they're using actual explosions and actual planes and shit. You know, here and there they do try to use the old school like film background, and it looks fake, but but as a whole, so much better than Pearl Harbor. And you could say the same, I think, of the Star Wars movies, frankly, like the ones in the 70s where they're using the actual little figurines instead of doing 100% computer animation on everything.
That's like in Come and See, when the boy hides behind that cow and then the Nazis machine gun through the cow and they killed the cow in real life to film it with a Gatling gun.
Did they really kill the cow?
Yeah, that movie's fucking nuts because everything you see in it, like, they just, like, did. And it scared the shit out of everyone in it.
Wait, this is that Soviet anti-war film, right? That everybody was talking about a few weeks ago for some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, and the star of the movie is like a young boy. By the end of filming it, his hair is white. But
yeah, I'm not watching that.
My point is, the cow in that film looks much more compelling than the cow they used in Kung Pao Enter the Fist, which is a digital recreation.
Yeah, the one that
you got to kill the cow for art, you know.
You gotta kill the owl for art. Yeah,
I mean, I don't generally approve of killing animals for art, but cows we've already declared full-scale war on. Like, you just use that hamburger at the end, I guess. I don't know.
Unless you're Hindu, they're fair game, yeah.
This gets talked about a lot in, like, horror, where, like, the golden era of horror, and especially, like, body horror shit, whereas like the Cronenberg, like The Fly era of practical effects, where they were making all this stuff out of plaster and silicone and stuff, and then doing Sarah Squirm shit with your fucking head.
It's so funny to imagine like an old director being like, "I'm doing Sarah Squirm shit. We're making art."
Yeah, but like that shit looked really cool, and nowadays they'll remake like those old movies, and like they look fucking
like
lame.
Play-Doh. It looks like Play-Doh or plastic clay people in special effects. It looks lame as fuck.
Yeah, and most of the time it's because it's CGI, and the reason it's CGI is because this is where like the base comes into the equation. It's because it costs less to do it a certain way, and you know the economy is what it is now, and it's completely changed, and there's like you can't make you can't take any risk in film anymore above a certain budget, so everything that gets made has to be made a certain way, and like maybe that is what shapes things to be these like weird echoes of the past. And,
well, that
go ahead.
Yeah, that brings up another point Mark Fisher makes about the base, about how in Britain specifically before the 70s and 80s, artists got grants and they could go to art school for free, and you could be a working class person, and he says, you know, your parents would tell you, don't go to art school, it's a waste of time, and you could say, fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway. And now you can't really do that unless you want to become a debt peon for the rest of your life, you know. So it's the fact the class structure of art affects the content we see, and the market-based character of it affects, I think, the derivative. To the extent that he is right about things being derivative, I think that's the primary factor there.
Well, Anders, you brought up a really good point, and like, you know, one thing that like, and to kind of go off of your point too, Jake, one thing that like I kind of like couldn't really make a one-to-one example is like when he's talking about like this welfare state that, you know, existed, that it's now emaciated, and how it really did support artists, right? Just in terms of housing, right? Even a basic thing, like you need somewhere to live, right? You also need time, like the mental creative time to work on these things. Man, I was like, dude, this is where like, you know, this British motherfucker, man, I was like, dude, I like tried to look up one-to-one analogies, like whatever art program FDR did, but it wasn't the same thing, right? Like the United States never really had that welfare state. I mean, I guess the New Deal, right? But even that was nothing compared to what like, you know, the UK and other like European countries were doing like post-World War II. So like, that was one thing that bugged me out as like a Yankee, right? I was like, well, dude, like, you can't go back, because what Fisher is saying is to return to this model of social democracy of the 70s and the 60s, right? Basically is kind of what he's saying, right? To reclaim these lost futures. But motherfucker, like, I'm an American, like, we didn't really have, I mean, of course, there was a lively artistic creative culture in the United States, mostly facilitated by Black Americans. But like, you don't really have that kind of like welfare system that existed for people to flourish as creatives. You know, I don't know if y'all feel this way, but it feels like the big Hollywood film industries have had a chokehold on that industry since the beginning of, like, you know, the silent film. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really,
Well, in a way, I feel like in America, the artist is seen as the ultimate entrepreneur, because like the idea that you would give public taxpayer dollars to somebody who's making art is just absolutely absurd to, I feel like, most Americans. So if you manage to pull it off and get people to give you money for your art, then you're a genius. But everyone else who tries and fails at that is just a joke who should not be taken seriously and pissed on.
It's weird. I feel like because Mark Fisher's British, like, he's kind of making an argument from over there based on the, you know, seeing it from that perspective, where he's saying, like, it's tragic that the future that was lost was specifically that one of social democracy before, like, Thatcher in England and shit like that. And I think it sounds weird. It reads weird from my perspective being over here. But I think you're right, Aaron, that, like, he's seeing it as there's kind of one true art and it's being lost. But American art has always been fundamentally different from British and from everywhere else. And, like, one example of that is stand-up comedy is, like, uniquely an American art form. And I am like a nationalist when it comes to stand-up comedy. I don't think people outside of this country know how to do it. And I think it's kind of a monster. Like, it's a monstrous thing that's a byproduct of this individualistic fucking cowboy gunslinging entrepreneurial society that we have.
That you would have the balls to go up there and, like, just fucking riff, like, in front of fucking people with no sense of humility at all. Like, you mean, is that, it's very American.
That's like riding trains all night and just jumping into different places to do it for drink tickets and shit like that. And for whatever reason, it produces people that are able to do this art form that arguably destroys you as a person, in my experience. But, like, when you see British people do it, they're like, they're just doing one-man shows, and that's
not totally true. That's true of Edinburgh, but you look at Frankie Boyle, Stuart Lee.
It's as a cultural trend. It trends more one-man showy.
No, but that's not true of people. That's not like, true of all of Britain. I'm
exaggerating. I'm saying all.
You're saying the mainstream. You're saying, like, the mainstream, Jake, is what you're saying.
I'm just saying it tends that way. Like, it's weird. You have British people that visit, British comics will visit New York, and they'll be like, you know, like they'll be doing their Edinburgh shit, like, at, like, bar shows that we do here, and we're like, no, you're supposed to also have jokes. Like, I'm not saying, I'm exaggerating a little bit.
Jake is right, and you're triggered.
I told you I'm being a fucking nationalist chauvinist about this, because it's the one thing I let myself really be a Nazi about, is it's my art form. But you know, I'm fucking around to some extent. But I think that it's the reason that the fucking thing is shaped differently in, like, different countries, and it's specifically at its peak, like, pure itself in America.
Well, let me ask you a question. And not to cut you off, let me ask you a question then. Because maybe this is, I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but whatever, it doesn't matter. You think somebody like, all right, Andrews, I'll ask you this. Does someone like a Dave Chappelle exist does someone like that's not a good example either. But Dave Chappelle, let's just use him. I was going to say Louis C.K., but it's probably not a good example. Does someone like Dave Chappelle exist in the UK? Is this like a thing?
Yes, yeah. Frankie Boyle.
I don't know who that is, though.
He doesn't. That's the thing, is he's a brilliant comedian, and he does not do the one-man show thing at all, but he's a brilliant comedian. But if you're an American, you only get half of his jokes because they're so specific to Britain. Yeah. But half of them are really funny and are, like, cutting cultural commentary, and he's not doing the one. He's not doing a, you know.
But consider this the other big British example, Eddie Izzard. Okay, he's still doing jokes, that we would recognize as jokes here in the West, in the wild West. We understand he's having a laugh, mate. But the aim of an Eddie Izzard versus a Dave Chappelle is a completely different art form, because one is attempting to create high art, and then the other one is attempting to create like this American bar art thing that only like is happening here.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
We can sit here and nitpick all day and come up with like fucking exceptions to the rule. Like, Stuart Lee's another one, right? That's kind of he's a comic. Like, sure, he's not a fucking storyteller. But my point is more just about the thing being, the form being shaped by the base, right?
Yeah.
And so like, another, just before I get out of this, or before I cede the floor here to what we can argue about stand up a fucking day, I just wanted to mention this other thing that I thought expressed this pretty well, or illustrated it, which is there was this fucking article that went really viral last week in the New Yorker, this piece on what's his face, the Jeremy Strong guy who plays Kendall on Succession, and there's a story in it. So he's a big method actor, and his hero is Dustin Hoffman, and he tells a story about Dustin Hoffman when he's filming Marathon Man, where apparently, Dustin Hoffman's doing this scene with Laurence Olivier. Dustin Hoffman's American, Laurence Olivier is British, right? And what Hoffman does is he has to look like kind of rough and sick for a scene. So he just stays up for 3 days, like drinking and doing coke and partying and shit. And then he goes and films the scene. He looks like shit. And he's like, well done in the method acting, right? Laurence Olivier turns to him and he goes, good God, man, haven't you heard of acting? Right. And that illustrates the split pretty well, which is that there's entirely two different conceptions of like how to make art, and the Dustin Hoffman one, I think arguably is like shaped by like fucked up American economic shit of like, you have to be this driven psychopath to rise above everyone else around you and shit or whatever.
It's funny because I've had two different acting teachers tell me that story, and one tells it, that way, that like Olivier was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? But I had another one who was like, and Olivier thought it was so cool. Like that this guy.
It is a little cool.
That seems like a very colored American perspective too. Like, actually, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Well, everyone was arguing about that Jeremy Strong thing last week, and it was split. I mean, some people were like, isn't that how you make a good fucking show? And some people were like, that's annoying. You shouldn't do that. You should be a better actor and not have to do that. It's like, there's no right answer here. I mean,
right. I think he personally is a weirdo and like has to do that on a personal level, but you shouldn't. And that's the thing that drives me crazy about theater people is I remember once I was in a show with a rubber gun. It was made out of rubber, no ammunition, nothing in it whatsoever. And I was just kind of toying with it, just like feeling it, because I had to carry this in the show, getting a sense for what it was. And this guy who was in charge of like the props or whatever came up to me and he's like, hey man, so you're supposed to be treating that like it's a real gun.
Oh my fucking God.
So you're going to need to put your finger not on the trigger and just be really, really fucking careful. It's like, it's not a real gun.
It's not a real gun.
I'm sorry.
Is he trying to get you prepared for is he trying to get you prepared for like treating it as a real gun in the actual play itself, or he's just being a weird theater
Well,
person?
yeah, it's like a pervasive philosophy that whenever there's a fake gun, and if this was a real gun, I would completely agree. But even if there's a fake gun, everyone on set needs to be consumed by the conceit that it is real and could kill somebody at any time, and it's just like this collective, thing you have to convince each other of, and it's like. That's fine if you want to do that. I'm not going to do that. That's
not how... you know who else didn't take that advice? Alec Baldwin. Look where you at now. Look where you at now, bro.
Right. That was a real gun, but yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of on the prop master's side here. If Alex Baldwin probably fucked around like that with a million fake guns and then just picked up a real gun and just forced a habit,
Fucking dumb to realize it. Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, that was. I don't know. I mean, it was his fault as a producer, but apparently the prop master, the gun person there, the gunslinger or whatever, was very reckless with weapons.
It wasn't union, I don't think either.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of producers, I'm going to do a segue like Anders. Okay, so I was thinking about this because one of the things that Mark Fisher does in this book is he talks about remakes a lot, reboots and stuff like that, and how they land in this uncanny space where like you miss the essence of something when you try to reboot something that's from the past or like the 70s or whatever, and you put all these like shiny veneers on it and stuff that try to make it like look authentic. He talks about Michael Sheen's acting and how like in his pursuit of just look like matching the verbal tics of whoever he's playing in a movie, he misses the point, which is to recapture like the essence or whatever. And a lot of that is then deconstructed, in ways that make you realize like, oh, the second version is bad because it doesn't speak to the socio-economic political bullshit, yada yada yada, the base or whatever, right? So like he used a bunch of British examples, but I was thinking about this because they made Cowboy Bebop into a live action thing.
Trash.
Everyone hated it.
Fucking trash.
I enjoyed it. I just imagined I was watching a DVD extra the whole time. Seriously, I was like, doesn't matter. It doesn't undo the but it ultimately was bad. And I think a big reason it was bad is illustrated in this thing that happened where they interviewed one of the producers on the show, this guy Andre Nemec, and his whole thing was that he said the show is good and we wanted to make it look really fun and yada yada and be like fun and bubblegummy because we wanted to avoid, this is the quote, painting a dystopian picture of the future. And if you like the show,
we live in it. We already live in that dystopia. Like, what the fuck are you running away from?
Right.
Anyway,
also,
sorry, Jake, go ahead.
Well, I mean, like, I think is a pretty good example of this thing that Fisher was talking about, because he's like, I mean, the original Cowboy Bebop came out in 1998, and it's, kind of ambiguous, like what the essence of it is reflecting, but like it's a sci-fi thing. It's in the future, but it's a great fucking show because it really resonates with, I think, millennials, because it's like you got these fucking people in their, kind of early to mid lives. They're all in like their 20s and 30s and shit like that. They're bogged down with inescapable debt. They're essentially doing gig work. So it's really fun to watch because it's like, the most like kind of exaggerated, fantastical version of our dumbass careers, Yeah,
they're doing gig work in space.
Yeah, you'd be getting a closer approximation, making them all PAs on Mars.
Right, it's basically what it is. It's fun to watch when you're in your 20s and you're working fucking bullshit jobs, or your 30s or your 40s, or fucking, our entire lives, essentially. Yeah. But that's also, I mean, we kind of don't have this thing that boomers had where like they're like, and then you turn 30 and they give you a real job and you're set for the rest of your life. We kind of have this perpetual like 1,000-yard stare thing to the end of time, and that show has that in the reality that it's set in. I mean, the moon blew up in the original fucking Cowboy Bebop, and they're all just like floating through space wondering what the fuck is going to go on with that. Earth has been trashed, and there's still like, and I think this is what he was getting at. Because this guy, I think, is a tech dork. In the original Cowboy Bebop, it's it's in the future, it's in space, but every once in a while you'll see like somebody like pick up a cup noodles and then like use a space thing to cook it or whatever. Yeah. And that's not supposed to make you feel good. Like, I think that's supposed to be like, wow, capitalism still exists, and all the brands are still around and shit. That's bad. But this guy's a tech dork who thinks capitalism will solve everything. So he's like, that's good, right? And that's why he like missed the point entirely, because so I guess what I'm saying is I think this hauntology thing that Mark Fisher does definitely applies to the dissonance between the original Cowboy Bebop and this dumbass Netflix show they made. Like, they made it look like they made the John Cho's hair look like spikes, sure, but they missed the point,
But see, there's the flip side to these reboots and remakes that Fisher talks about. Like, he talks about nostalgia films, or like nostalgia like media, And the best example I could think of is Stranger Things, right? Like, so I know Cowboy Bebop like takes place in like this future, this retro future, because it was came out in the 1998. So it's kind of what we would imagine, I guess, the future would look like, which still does look like the future, but it also deals with like kind of the essence of, I guess, like, I mean, I don't know if it's too much to say, but I guess like towards the end of the 20th century, all of the anxiety, right, that people had, right. but it sort of like puts in this fantastical futuristic world. Like, I think on the flip side, like, whereas the Cowboy Bebop, the Netflix show, is not successful because it doesn't really like address the essence of what that show was, especially for like, people that are like in their 20s and 30s. Like, Jameson talks about the nostalgia film, and I think Stranger Things is a perfect example because people like that, because not only is it almost like, I mean, I wasn't alive in the 80s, but it seems to be a very accurate depiction of 80s culture, of technology, of, in the third season, of the social anxieties of the time, of the Cold War. But I think that people vibe with these sorts of like films that either take place in the past or kind of have like this. I think Drive is another example, and this is not an original example I'm bringing up. I think Fisher, or maybe another writer I'm thinking of, Grafton Tanner, has another book on nostalgia. Drive takes place in kind of like the 21st century, right? But it very much has like 70s, like late 70s, early to mid 80s vibes to it. Like even the font, like the first thing you could look at, right, and see that kind of like Miami's like 80s sort of font, Vice City shit it has going on. Like, those films are equally as seductive, but at least what they do is sort of address these material social concerns at the time, which is why like something like Cowboy Bebop, I mean, if you're trying to make it campy, if you're not trying to address like the paranoia that people had at the time, then I mean, I don't think it's going to be good, right? It's not going to be faithful to the source material, right? And you might as well call it something else, I don't know if any of that made sense, but I think the nostalgia thing is really interesting to me because I watched the last season of Stranger Things and I was like, man, why can't I stop watching this? I wasn't even alive in the 80s, man, but it's just like what the show, it's not being like heavy handed with it. It's very seductive in that way,
Right. That's, I always think about how, so I have sort of an obsession with the 1996 presidential election has been established.
You don't say.
Yeah.
But that's never come up on the show before.
Yeah, no. I've been listening for a couple of years. It's never come up.
What about it specifically?
Are you haunted by it, would you say?
Yes, I truly am, because that's the first election I remember. But I started getting really fascinated by it in like 2008 because I think that if you really want to understand your place in history, you got to look back like 10 years because that's the part that always kind of gets covered up. That's the blurriest part. You know what I mean? Because it's like the fashion of like 10 years ago is still a little bit too close to now to really separate from now.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And like, especially looking back as a kid in the aughts, looking back at the 90s, it was just a sort of a parallel universe because 9/11 changed the paradigm so much, just culturally, politically, artistically, everything. So it was like this thing where everything looks like today almost, but something is just way different. The way that sort of anxiety you're talking about. Sorry, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's kind of a hauntology in itself. Is like, and this kind of goes back to how the specter of Marx that Derrida was talking about, the time that is the period that's supposedly ended and gone is still alive and well with us.
Yeah. One thing too, I have to bring this book up if we're going to talk about Ghosts in My Life. Just people should also check out The Circle of the Snake by Grafton Tanner. He actually lives in Georgia, and I bought his book for my piece. And one thing that he talks about is pre-recession nostalgia, right? And this is the mode that we're trapped in, right? We're trapped in pre-recession nostalgia, which is everything up until like the 2008 crash, right? So like the first decade of the 21st century. And it's also before, 9/11. It's also before like Web 2.0, the digital interconnectedness, the online world that we have now. And we've been trapped in this since I would say since the 2010s, right? Like we've kind of come off of this, still pining for not as far back as the 70s. I mean, yeah, sure. But I think because our generation is culturally dominant, or I guess we're the ones that are being catered to by content creators, right? That's, I guess, what I mean as consumers. Yeah, man, it's this is why you had reboots this year that went from Sex and the City to sure, I guess Prince of Bel-Air, which is way before the recession, but still very much within our lifetime, like it's not necessarily that people are pining for the 70s, you know, people are specifically pining for the 80s and the 90s. And that's the generation that, like, the decade that we grew up in, you know. Like I was talking about The Last Dance in my piece, and I was like, bro, I never even watched basketball, right? But I'm watching this, and there's like really the only way I could describe it is like there's almost like this visual kind of phenomenon that's attributed to nostalgia where I almost imagine things differently. Like, I'm not saying like in a grainy 90s sort of like videography sort of way, right? But it really does kind of, guess for lack of a better word, color my perspective of that time. Where it felt like the 90s, like we thought that the future was right around the corner in the 90s, right? Leading up until like the end of the 20th century. And then, I don't know, man, after 9/11, after the recession, it almost feels like things kind of stopped. Like culture slowed, but time sped up, right? Is analogy that Mark Fisher uses, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think one thing that is kind of interesting about what you're talking about is like you can be nostalgic for a thing that you don't like, you weren't there for, or B, like literally never happened.
Yeah.
That kind of is going on with like remember like when Biden was running for president, and basically like his entire pitch was just like, I'm gonna undo time. I am a time wizard. I'm an archon from outer space.
The Republicans are gonna forget the last 60 years, and they're gonna come to our side. That's what's gonna happen. Yeah,
we're bringing MGMT back.
But it was crazy because it was like, if you're looking at this as a leftist, you're like, but that's the thing that directly preceded all this horrible stuff happening. So like, you know, that's a bad idea, right?
We're gonna do it again if we go back 8 years. We're gonna do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the flip side of Trump's Make America. It was the flip side of Trump's Make America Great Again. It really was.
That was the other thing I was going to say. Is it like MAGA stuff is like, you know, a lot of people who are like really into it, because it harkens back to like a weird, you know, blip in history that was not static, but he's arguing it's a lost future. Was you know, the 1950s, like fucking suburban, you know, we have all this money from World War II bullshit. But like a lot of people who buy into it like are like Mexicans and shit. Like, we're fucking there. Like, why are you feeling nostalgic about this thing? So there's this kind of weird like 3-point turn you make with hauntology, where it's not a direct line. It's like you go and then you bounce off at one point, and you're like, oh, I'm nostalgic for that thing that I kind of suspect is around that corner over there, but I wasn't actually there for. You know,
I would like to be nostalgic for a nice thing I heard about.
Yeah.
Well, it's a go ahead, Andrew. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just like I feel like this stuff is kind of cyclical, in that like one of my first memories is from the 90s of bell bottoms, which were from the 70s, but every 20 years, and I've heard this from fashion people, you get a throwback, like at least one article of clothing, and that was huge when I was like, you know, 5 or 6, was bell bottoms. And I associate it with like, oh, that was the thing in the 90s, but it was
Spice
aping
Girls
off of the 70s in the 90s, you know.
But isn't it, and maybe to segue, I mean, I don't like time. I think time is an interesting concept with hauntology. And to kind of piggyback off of you, Anders, like, again, like I like streetwear, you know, I like 80s, like retro Jordans and shit like that. But like, dude, it's like the fashion world is going back to, now it seems, the late 90s and the early 2000s, where baggy is cool again, right? And it's always, the 80s and the 90s have always been popular, but it's specifically these early 2000 styles where I'm talking about like double XL tees with like baggier jeans and stuff like that.
Are we getting Jenkos back?
Nah, we don't need to go that far. Not yet. Hopefully not yet. But like, it feels like the interesting thing about hauntology to me is like, and the internet in general, which is like kind of powers like this whole nostalgia industry, and hauntology is like, it collapses time, right? So much so, and maybe that culture has slowed so much that like I saw an ad for like not an ad, but I heard the 90s show was coming out, right? And okay, I guess like the 90s are as far back in time as the 70s were when that show came out, I guess,
right?
But not really. It doesn't really feel like it. because it feels like, yo, what the fuck really happened in the 90s? You know what I'm saying? What really happened from the year 2008 to 2021, right? Like, it doesn't really feel like a lot. And that's the weird thing with Hauntology. Like, in the internet, I guess it collapses time and things feel much closer, you know, than they actually are, you know?
It's almost extra reminiscent. I'm sorry, we just did 90s memorabilia 10 years ago. Does nobody remember that? We spent the entire time talking about the 90s. You can't do it anymore. We just did it.
Oh yeah, like all the memes that were like, remember the 90s or whatever.
You're a 90s kid when you wear those pants.
Yeah, you know you're an early 2000s kid. It's like, yes. Like what?
It's coming. It's coming. It's every 20 years. That's my
The entire argument of like Ghosts of My Life is what you just said, though, is that like something is happening post the neoliberal turn where this process that, you know, you could argue was eternal, but it's like speeding up so much that it is fundamentally changing. Like if it used to take an entire lifetime for a cycle to happen where bell bottoms came back, then you as a person would notice that one time in your life. But if it speeds up exponentially, it'll be like within the same year, like, oh, bell bottoms are back again. And then time will be this weird blender thing.
Jenko's spring.
Until it ceases to be like a time process. And it'll be because of, you know, I guess a combination of like technology making everything instant and everything right here and right now, and then also this like weird ennui displacement thing that he's describing. Everything is just going to, I think the argument is that it just flattens out at some point, and then we're just in this space where it stops happening. But I don't know, I guess like Zoomers have me confused about this because they're like wearing fucking Blossom hats and bucket hats and shit, and I don't like it. And I'm like, when I see them, I'm like,
no, you're being a crotchety old man, Jake. Don't be that crotchety old man.
The thing is, I am, and I can see myself doing that. And I'm like, but this means that time is still happening, right? Because I'm getting old. So then we're not in a time blender because I am aging at the rate you're supposed to, I think, right?
Well, time in a blender.
You're getting older, but they're staying the same age.
Oh no.
Well, like think about it like this, man. This is again, I got to bring this book up, Circle of the Snake by Grafton Tanner. He has this amazing section called Instant Nostalgia where he talks about Instagram and the way that Instagram specifically powers the nostalgia industry. Because I mean, just the nature of like taking photographs, right? And like, from your day or your week or whatever and posting them. But the fact that you can add on these filters, right? And make things look pre-aged, and the internet in general, like you're saying, Jake, everything is flattened. So it's like from one vantage point, from your fucking computer desk, your computer, your phone, you can access all of cultural history at once. And what's, I guess, weird with the Zoomers, man, or not weird. I mean, it's like, I guess it's just the trajectory of things. It's like, I don't know. I could be wrong about this. I mean, any Zoomer listening would be like, no, this motherfucker's totally wrong. But it's like, it feels like they're grabbing, right? Like they're going through a department store and grabbing things, random shit off the shelves from different decades and just throwing it in the cart and building something out of that, maybe. But a lot of it, again, is powered or facilitated, communicated through these new technologies, these new communicative technologies. So I don't really know what the fuck is going on with them, man. It's like kind of like they're this anachronistic generation, but also like nostalgic. I have no idea, man. It's weird.
They all look like you press random when you're making a Tony Hawk character.
Or The Sims.
You get random. You get random.
Yeah. That's why he's called it.
Well, let me ask you guys this, because this is what I've been thinking about during this conversation. Is like, I feel like the market plays such a role with, whether it's making the Cowboy Bebop reboot. Or
Direct your
like,
hate mail at Anders.
I've been watching the anime. It's quite good.
The anime is awesome.
Yeah. Or like all these reboots, right? It's because, this is sold in the past. It's something people recognize. Let's crank out a new one because we know it's going to make money. If the market did not play such a role in everything, including art, fashion, music, etc., what kind of relationship with nostalgia do you think we'd have? Would there be the license to make, movies like Reds, which we discussed on the Patreon this week, which could only have happened within that short period of time before the studios cracked down on directors having autonomy?
Well, you're describing two different things, because nostalgia can happen culturally just when, people be missing the 70s or whatever. But this thing you're describing where it moves in cycles and you get a new Cowboy Bebop every 20 years and Bell Bottoms every 25 years is just market incentives switching gears. It's not a genuine feeling. It's just something.
Right. But how?
It's just the algorithm shifting.
But
right,
what would
that's
that
the
genuine?
question, right?
Yeah.
Like if communism happened and there wasn't this fucking huge oppressive market force informing everything, would the market would all this, because everything is shaped by the fucking market, right? So like if you take that element and you change it, would we have as much like nostalgia?
I think so, man. There's but not to go back to my piece, but like, well, no, it's actually like super relevant. Like at the end, I spent like fucking like 9 pages complaining about this thing. And then when I got to the end of it, I was like, shit, man, like I kind of need like some sort of like panacea. I need some sort of like suggestion as to how to exit what Grafton Tanner calls this culture of recursion, where we're just kind of repeating the same shit over and over again, right? And I read this piece by Stuart Hall where he talks about deconstructing the popular. And he has this thing that he calls the dialectic of the cultural struggle that made me think of popular culture in a very new way that I appreciate a lot. And what he says is that the same way that history is never fixed, right? But it's about a contestation over power, over influence. It's why, like, I'll watch something as a communist that I know is completely geared, right, to kind of like, tap at my little like receptors that will invoke empathy or will invoke sadness or anything like that. But at the same time, I can watch a lot of shit, no matter how base it is, I guess, on a cultural level, and see myself in it as a Black man, as a working class person. And instead of thinking of the working class as these objective depositories where we just dump information to, right, or the ruling class rather dumps information into for cultural hegemony, like people actually interact with the shit that they watch, right? So like kind of at the end, my not solution, it's not really original, I guess, but maybe there needs to be a revolutionary popular culture that seizes on these tensions and fissures. Like I was saying before, like, the old becomes new again, right? Like what was once like taboo now becomes profitable. And that happens all the time. And like, Anders, you were saying this, right? I think like hip hop is like an expression out of, it's not necessarily Marxist or materialist, but it is materialist, actually. It's an expression of toying with these fissures, exploiting these tensions, right? In culture. And that's why like I get kind of like, pissed when like so-called leftist materialists like talk about the culture war, because I'm like, motherfucker, it is a war, right? It's a war on material grounds that actually fucking matters, and we should engage in it. And to think that you can construct an alternative culture outside of the popular mainstream is exactly what podcast and left Twitter and whatever other left media sphere that is inclusive or exclusive and like an echo chamber, that's kind of what we have. Not to call this show that, this is the show for the dumb left. Other shows, not also the Trillbillies as well. We're for the dumb left too. But you guys know what I'm saying, right? Like,
yeah. No, I agree a lot, because I think that like when people are real, like kind of vulgar materialists and just sort of reduce everything to like really bare material terms. There's a tendency, and I think it's disjointed. It's based on a different time in history, especially to discount the culture war stuff, because there's a lot of examples of how that has classically been a distraction, or it's been a thing that you're like, they take away all the material stuff and they go, here, play with this, and it's like,
argue about this. Yeah, it
doesn't work by itself, sure. But especially because of just the way technology has played into all this shit, I'm kind of fucking contrarian about this. I think within the left, where I'm like, no, like this is a fucking battlefield people wouldn't be so mad about this if it wasn't doing something.
Exactly.
And I really like the way that you ended your piece with that in mind, because like so much, of Marx is like you kind of you've taken the wrong message away from like materialism if you read about all this stuff and then your conclusion is, wow, history is just these gigantic tectonic plates that rub up against each other and then things happen. Because the ultimate point is, and now it's time for you to like engage in this thing and fucking, these things only happen if you take a part in it and try to get other people to take a part in it or whatever. And that's true for material organizing and stuff like that. But it's also very true for, I think you're right. I think there's just ways that we can build little cultural touchstones and stuff that everyone can grab onto that are definitely big parts of the ways that we like navigate our lives. Most of what people do all day is stare at the internet and watch TV. It's the world we live in now, and it helps inform things. And so, definitely don't be somebody who's like, I'm gonna, cause the entire revolution to happen with a song I wrote or whatever. But
only my friends are going to hear and my Twitter followers, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's just jerking off, but like,
right. Well, it's, I think I may have said this already at not this episode, but there's that old adage about like, well, in Weimar Germany, there were a bunch of satirists who were making fun of Hitler and they didn't stop him from coming to power. But it's like, okay, who came in and got him out, right? It was the Soviets, it was the Americans. They had images that were pumped into their brains about who the Germans were and why they needed to be killed, right? It's not everything, but the aesthetics and art and that stuff has a place, and it's often impossible to reduce it and figure out exactly what it's doing, but it's there. It's a part of life.
Yeah. I mean, like part of how I became a leftist is that I had a cool teacher who in Texas you were not allowed to teach shit like Howard Zinn.
I thought you were about to say not allowed to teach. I was like, that sounds about right.
Basically not allowed to teach.
It's a Marxist plot, teacher.
But he would give you people's history like when you graduated, if you were like, in the know, like you knew, go to what's his face, and he's like wink wink, and he bought a bunch of copies and he'd give them out, and then you would start your life and go, holy shit, here's this. He was like Snape or something. He was like,
wow. Rockefeller chain. He gave you your rock chain, man.
It was fucking cool. And what it very much felt to me after getting shoveled all the bullshit from the Texas education system in my brain, and then having this secret thing passed where you learn about, American socialism and stuff like that. It very much is like someone illuminated one of the lost, what's the term? Lost future, lost futures. And you go, wait, here's a link back to this thing that you can maybe go back to and see if you can drag it into the future or try to make it happen or whatever.
Radical nostalgia is like another thing that's, again, Grafton Tanner brings up in his book, and I never heard of the term, but yeah, it is what it sounds like, right? It's about remembering, like, these resistance movements, right? These social movements, these revolutions, and sort of like cultivating like a memory of resistance. But like, I had a little bit of issue with that because it's like, dude, like all of left Twitter and the online left is all about reminiscing about we're haunted by these victories, and like, it really gets to the point where you can just kind of sit there and I mean, this is in the piece I wrote, but I mean, I believe it's true. You distort the sacrifices that like the people that came before us, they made, right? You think that times were easier. And that's what nostalgia does, right? It whitewashes things. It blots out the ugly realities for marginalized people, for the working class. It's not enough to just like remember, right? Like when people used to fight, it's like creating something new and creating a culture that comes out of that. And I don't know, man, like, yeah, I'm on Twitter a lot and like it podcasts and shit and all that shit's great. But like, I think about my mom a lot. My mom's always the barometer, right, for this shit, you know what I mean? And I think about my mom and her political trajectory to the left in the past couple of years. And I'm like, man, there has to be a way that over time, but not too much time because we don't have a lot of time, with futurelessness and all, but like there has to be a way that like I could have somebody like my mom and somebody on left Twitter sit in the same room and watch the same media or listen to the same song, right? That has a revolutionary message of class struggle, but that is not beating somebody over the head, right? There has to be a way to do that, you know?
Like, hey, TV, Mom, I need you to sit down and listen to the Pod Damn America episode on the hit movie Reds. Tell me how it makes you feel.
I would hope she would never listen to any of the podcasts I record. I would hope not.
Didn't Anders have a good point about...
Tell her to listen to the first 15 minutes of this podcast.
We were talking about Nancy Reagan giving head.
That'll radicalize your mom.
About to get me disowned, bro.
I think Alex should be a cynic. People do say they turned their mom onto fucking Chapo or whatever. It happens.
Yeah.
Everyone's, a lot of people's parents are not.
I've turned a lot of people's moms on.
I'd like to see proof for that statement.
The Anders is one or mine?
Anders.
Oh.
Ask your own.
Ask my mom. That's very rude of you to say.
Sorry.
I wish y'all could have seen Anders' face right now, man. Your face, Anders.
That's a married woman you're talking about.
Pure mischief.
And
dragging through the mud.
Looks like a haunter over here. In Hauntology. Sticking his tongue out. His floating hands. All right.
Andrew's sticking his tongue out at me now. Stop it.
Turning into a Gengar. All right. Well, I mean, problem with conversations like this is because they could go on, but
it could go on for fucking ever.
Because there's a lot of weird shit he talks about. Like, I'm not even gonna bring it up because that would be
it's too dangerous.
Oh, I know what you're saying.
Another 45
giving
minutes
rim jobs. She has a whole chapter on that.
It's just it gets into canceled people, and it's like we don't have the time.
Oh, there was we were over time, but there was the whole we talked about that technology, I guess, and the whole VR augmented shit, man. That shit's weird, dude.
Well, let's end on that. How do you think that's going to play into all this? How do you think the metaverse plays into Hauntology?
Dude, it's totally. I mean, first of all, I was talking to a homie about this the other night at a bar who's into this stuff. He's trying to tell me how this shit works, and I don't know, man. I'm like fucking drunk, so I'm just like, whatever, dude. I'm working on this piece. You should listen to it. He's like, yeah, that reminds me. But he's talking about this whole VR stuff and augmented reality, and it's like, yeah. First of all, I don't think that shit will ever get to the level I'm about to like talk about, like because I feel like we've been waiting for this shit for like 20 years. But I could for sure imagine that they want to. I mean, create this like escape like for people like amidst like social and economic like environmental collapse where like you can escape into the past. I don't know how that's gonna work. I don't know if it's gonna be some shit where you're gonna fucking be at like I don't even know, man, like trying to think of an older band from the 90s, like going to a concert and being there live, like maybe
Yeah, you put on Google Glass and you're at an Eve 6 concert all of a sudden, and you're like, what year is it?
Actually, maybe that's not possible because all you need is just a fucking pair of like fucking Oculus headsets and I don't know, maybe a treadmill that
anyone watch this.
But I don't know. What do y'all think, man? I think maybe people would want to watch it, man. Maybe people would want to get in that shit.
I don't know. I think you're right that VR technology has been coming out for like 30 years straight somehow. Like,
yeah.
Every year, it's like, it's finally here. I'm like, I don't believe you. You lied last time. I'm a Google Glass.
Damn, you're right. Google Glass went nowhere.
They finished it, and it was just like a bad idea. It was the problem. You're not supposed to have numbers in front of your eyes. You need to see things. And
people were getting like whacked. Like not whacked, but like
very Italian way to put it.
Not killed, but like you would get whacked on the head and get them stolen, or just punched. You would just get punched in the face.
The classical
way. My family.
But see, y'all are downplaying it because I wear glasses almost 24/7, so I would have no problem with them shits just like popping up and like my right frame or whatever. I wouldn't fuck with that. I would have fucked with that.
It's got to be not identifiable, so people can't tell it's because the Google Glass ones were so obvious. It was
obvious that it was
nerd alert.
Yeah. You get whacked.
You get robbed, motherfucker. Yeah.
Nerd alert is one of the programs that comes on Google Glass.
I bet.
And it goes off.
If you're trying to rob somebody for the Google Glass, you as like the assailant have a Google Glass that has an app called Nerd Alert where you know in close proximity where
the Poindexter rating is through the roof.
Yeah, rob that motherfucker now. 15 feet away. Act now.
If VR like ever actually really kind of happened and was widely available, and then we just further kind of atomized and lonelyfied our lives, and instead of staring at your phone all day, you just have a fucking virtual boy on your head and you're just a vegetable or whatever. There's an argument that can be made that the stuff that he's talked about accelerates like even further, and we become further disconnected and don't even perceive time really the way it properly is happening. Because the part of this that like I kind of forgot the way he phrased it, but part of this is like the reason we're all kind of in this stasis. We're just like, well, this feels weird. Why do I, feel like I'm floating in space? Is because the process that you had to go through to perceive anything has been completely, like, what do you call it? It's just cut to like
streamlined.
It's streamlined. It's streamlined.
Like, it's like
an nth degree now.
Yeah. Like it's not like before where you had to sit in front of a computer, like a gray blocky computer, and enter the internet or enter Web 2.0. Now it's like fucking around you all the time as a phone, or it's on your wrist. So like it's always a part of you and you walk around with it all the time. Like, yeah, what you're saying, like that's become just that middleman's cut out. Like you are the internet now,
Yeah. And so like what is like Fisher saying about that though? That like what is the tragedy that he talks about with like the end of history being kind of a reality and capitalist realism happening and us living in this post neoliberal turn where everything is meaningless and everything is without like narrative, I guess, because of this thing he's describing where we, everything's decontextualized. Therefore, like we feel this weird urge to harken back. Yeah. Does that? I mean, I guess with VR that would just happen to a degree.
Well, I mean, it's like futurelessness, right? It's like, I mean, like I think that's why the pandemic, right, was. I don't know how to say this without saying it this way, but it's like with the idea with futurelessness is like since 9/11, we're all waiting for the next big thing to happen, right? And the pandemic was that next big thing where, in a way, as hard, this is going to sound so bad, but it almost allayed some of the societal mass paranoia and fear that people had, right? Because it's like, yo, something bad has got to happen soon, right? Something bad has got to happen soon, right? And it fucking did. Like in the United States, we're going to lose like, 1 million people more probably to this pandemic. Around the world, who the fuck knows? But like, it's very much like this, I guess the metaverse, virtual reality can combat, but not really. It just engenders more of a belief in this futurelessness because then people don't imagine a future, right? They just recede into the past. And meanwhile, like we're dealing with pandemics and we're dealing with worsening climate change. And I don't know if everyone's still waiting for the next terrorist attack, but that too. So it's like, I think our generation feels that the most, man. I mean, I know I feel that shit in my life, yo. I wake up in the morning, I'm like, man, what the fuck am I going to do today? What's the next week going to look like? What's this week going to look like? But projected on like, like a kind of like a longer timeline, like, yeah, I think everyone has that kind of fear, like we don't know what's going to happen next. And we're all kind of waiting for the next big thing to hit, which is terrifying,
Yeah. Just kind of like round this out. I don't know how to end this on a positive note at all. But
we're fucked.
Well, I just think about the things that like he's talking about, and the problem with history. And I think like this is an intractable human problem, and so many people clearly have this fucking up their perspective, especially older people. Is you can't tell how much of it is history and how much of it is you turning 30 or 31 or 32 or 40 or 50.
Yeah, and historicizing the past, right?
Yeah, and so I very much feel like we're in like a fucked up time right now, and I keep thinking about like what it was like 10 or 20 years ago in my life and how like things happened and there was fun and stuff like that and there was a future, and now every day I wake up and I'm just like holy shit.
Well, can I give you a happy analogy to kind of end it on, which is not really like happy? I mean, it is happy for me.
Yeah,
man,
and this will be good going into a new year. I mean, this is also the end of the year, so we're all thinking about time.
We're all thinking about time and shit, man. Well, dude, I have a nephew, man, who was born a year ago, and
congratulations,
man. This motherfucker like loves Coco Melon a little too much, but he just loves life and he loves laughing and just screaming for no reason. He's like one, and like I don't know, man. Like I don't know if I want kids, right? But I think that like especially like at least for me having a child, like a young, like a baby in my life, right? And for people who have kids or have like younger siblings and stuff, man, I think like a lot of like, well, their outlook on the world is just kind of living in the moment, right? And they don't have these fears about the future. And I know I'm not telling people to recede into being a child, but to just sort of like imagine that a future is possible if like my nephew is like happy and smiling and living in the now. And I don't mean to be corny or cheesy or anything, but like, I don't know, man, seeing him happy gives me a lot of joy, even if I don't personally have a lot of joy for myself and my future. But to kind of like be like, oh, nah, man, there's got to be a world for him, right? Like I have to be a part of creating that better world for him, right? Like he has no idea about like the dangers that he'll come across. Like he has no idea, and he doesn't need to have any idea. And as he gets older, I don't need to project any of my anxieties about the future onto him, you know? And I don't know, man. What am I telling people to have kids? No, don't have fucking kids and don't go to a fucking playground and stare and look at children and try to regain the hope for the future by looking at kids. It's creepy and kind of pedophilic. Very much so. Don't do that. But like, I mean, I don't know, man. Like that's what gives me hope, right? I guess like sort of a rebirth and a new cycle. And I see that through him. And I see that with even Zoomers, man. Like they're doing some cool shit. You know, like Andrews, you were saying earlier, like that kind of reinvention of culture is always happening. And if these kids don't turn into fucking fascists, you know, before then, and not all of them will, then maybe we got some hope for the future, man, you know?
Right. It's the youth. I'm going to go to the playground and be like, kids want to talk about dairy.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
In my podcast.
You talk about Big Daddy D. No, don't do that, please.
Yeah, you want to talk about ghosts of my life. Lost future.
Talk about all the things that give me anxiety. No.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Nancy Reagan?
Oh yeah, came full circle. That was really full circle.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think let's round up. Never mind.
No, go ahead, Andrews. I want to hear what you had to say. Go ahead.
Like the further we get away from the Cold War and Reagan, the more opportunity we have to create something new, and that's only going to come from a new generation and new generations, because it doesn't really change the haunting of what people thought of the USSR as and the ideas instilled by Reaganism. That's never gonna. It doesn't even have to end for that to change. The only way it changes is the people with memory of it fucking die. And
you know what? You're damn right, dude. Because my nephew has no recollection of he has no pre-recession nostalgia. He never will. I mean, he obviously does it now as a baby, but he never will because he didn't. But I am still haunted by memories of the Soviet Union. Not even just being like a communist, but like I mean, I was literally born in 1990. The year the wall fell. So it's like. That shit kind of like reverberates out at least like 30 years. So we just all got to die. I'm just going to keep smoking cigarettes and destroying my body. And then the next generation will not even remember any of that shit. And whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is that like ghosts are cool.
Like, those are tight. Yeah.
I like being visited by stuff from the past sometimes. You don't always have to just chase it around your house with a
I'd fuck some ghost pussy. I'd be
garlic and shit. And
get some ghost head. Yeah.
Well, the thing about ghosts is they bring you messages. That's all I'm trying to say.
There you go.
They're like a primitive form of email.
That's true.
Wow, that's a really good tweet.
All right, let's get the fuck out of here.
All right,
let's do some plugs. Definitely, Aaron, plug where people can read that piece you wrote and everything, man.
Yeah. So the piece, my Substack is called spacelight.substack.com. You can read the piece there. I'm going to try to be writing more and listen to the Trillbillies Workers Party. Listen to that podcast. It's cool. And I'm on it and it's tight. And yeah. And that's pretty much it. And follow me on Twitter at Paradoomer. And that's it.
Yeah. Paradoomer for now.
Paradoomer for now until I get booted. Nah, if I get booted again, I'm not coming back. I swear to God, man. I can't.
Well, I don't on record. You see, said it officially.
I can't do it.
Not even for 1 second.
No, I'm bullshitting. I'll come back.
It's been like 4 times already.
I got a VPN for like 2 years. Like I paid for it. Like I'm already, prepared.
Anybody else got plugs?
At Andersley here on Twitter, Dursley1 on Instagram, Redacted Tonight. It's the other job. And are you gonna plug the mutual aid thing in DC?
Yeah, but if you have it up, you can plug it.
No, I don't have it up, so I was just double checking.
I'm pulling it up right now. Alex, you have anything?
Oh, I wonder what it is. Yes, follow me on Twitter at Patak Test Kitchen, your one-stop shop for exciting new flavors. And be sure to go on over to Ballin' Out Super sometime to enter our exciting new recap of the Boo saga. Do you like Majin Buu? We're going to talk about Majin Buu. I'm very excited for it. He's so big, he turns you into candy, and he eats ya. Is he going to eat me? I can't wait to find out. And that's my plug for this week.
Okay, I found the thing I was going to plug. I have a bunch of shit to plug. First one, though, is... This was tweeted to me.
Oh, and I plugged Christmas.
You interrupted me to plug Christmas?
Christmas is coming up.
You gonna plug Kwanzaa though? You're not gonna plug Kwanzaa? That's fucked up.
I don't know when Kwanzaa is, but
me neither.
I'm gonna plug Kuji Chagalia. I'm gonna plug Haram. One of them is just called Harambe.
Ujama.
A DC mutual aid group is trying to buy this apartment building so the landlord can't kick out his tenants and they can turn it into affordable housing and mutual aid co-op. It's a heavy lift, but they've already come incredibly far. Please consider donating to this if you can. It'll be linked in the notes. It's from at DCW1 Mutual Aids, DC Ward 1 Mutual Aid. It's called the Baldwin House Nest Egg. It is accessible at givebutter.com/Baldwin House.
Sick URL.
Yeah.
Give butter.
You had to be on the internet early to get givebutter.com.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know who actually used to own butter.com is
I think
Nancy Reagan's now.
Nancy Reagan. Okay, so if you are one of our listeners who isn't a dude, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for this whole episode. I have a couple of things to plug. My other podcast, Why You Mad, that I do with my friend Luisa Diaz, has been on the show before. Also, I'm going on tour with Eve 6.
What?
It's really happening.
Y'all motherfuckers come to Atlanta?
I think so, yeah. Nationwide tour. It's in the spring. We're coming everywhere. I'm opening for them and We Are the Union, which is a really great queer ska band. I saw at Fest. And nothing is official. I don't have the details yet. Soon we'll have the actual dates out, but I think we're coming to everywhere major.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, that's in the fucking spring. Come check that shit out. And if you're in New York, I think I'm starting a new stand-up show. The first one, it's going to be for my birthday, which is in January. So the first one's at January 18th at the Gutter. I'll have all this stuff on my website and my pinned tweet. And then since I'm actually getting gigs, I will put it on my fucking website. But I hate putting shit on my website because Squarespace is a bad program. But I'll put it up there. So, but yeah, look at my pinned tweet if you are looking for the exact dates on shit like that. January 18th in New York City and Brooklyn at the Gutter, which is a fucking cool bowling alley that's also a punk bar. And then come see me open for fucking Eve 6, man. That's really happening.
That's gonna be tight as fuck, dude.
It's gonna be crazy.
I hope y'all come to Atlanta, man.
I think we're gonna
shows.
And I'm gonna meet Max Collins from Eve 6 for the first time going on this tour with him, which is insane. It's insane that he booked me. This is so funny. That in itself very insane thing to do, which you have to hand it to him.
Max is a cool dude, man.
I look forward to seeing how this changes you.
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna leave all of you behind. After I make
for the best.
hundreds of dollars.
Become a superstar.
Yeah.
About to become Eve 7.
Eve 7?
New band member.
Yeah. I'm gonna call
Called
it.
Eve 6 because there's 6 of them.
Because there's 6 of them, folks.
All right. Finished.
Finished.